Hello everybody, and welcome to the second part of our YouTube calculator, or our basic calculator. If you haven't watched the previous video, please do that now before watching this video. Otherwise you will be lost and you probably won't be able to catch up. For those of you who remember the last or previous video, your calculator should look like this. These are two numeric boxes. This is a combo box and this is simply a label. That's a label and that's just a button. Alright, so we don't have anything super fancy going on. So let's just review what we did last time. What we did essentially is we built our variables. We built our form load to say that our expression is going to always equal case 0 or addition by default. So when we load this, we'll have the addition sign right here. So we'll be ready to add. Alright, so now we have that. We need to figure out what we're going to do here to actually how to make these two values add or come together essentially. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back in here to our designer. I'm going to double click on my num value 1 and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to double click on my num value 2. Now what I need to do here is essentially I need to get this value and it needs to equal my integer value 1. So how I'm going to do that is I simply type this: int 1 equals num1 dot value. Now you could also do some other options here. We could also say to string, but we don't need it as a string value. Just as a simple integer value will work just fine because that's exactly what we need it for. And we need to do the same thing for our int 2. Alright, so now we have these two values, so when we change these values right here, it's going to change these values right here. Now there's one important variable that we are missing, and that is the third variable. Essentially what it equals. We don't have that variable in there yet, so we need to make that variable. So let's go ahead and do that now. So go ahead and dim, if I can spell, int 3 as integer. And now we can start building our statement. Now, I know we haven't worked a whole lot with select case, but I'm going to go ahead and use the select case just because honestly it's going to be the easiest way to build this. And it's going to be the easiest way for you to understand. So we're going to go select case, and we're going to go off our calculate. So now what it's going to do is we're going to base it off this calculate right here. So we're going to say case, and we're going to base it off of these string values that we just created. That way we know if to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and whatnot. And I can tell you right now there's a better way to do this, but this is the way I'm going to do this because I want to keep it basic. Later on, you will find a much better way to do this and a much better way to build this calculator. But for right now, you need to start out with the basics, so I don't want to confuse you. Alright, so it's going to check and see what this combo box equals, or what string value is in there. Based on that, it's going to determine how it's going to add or subtract or build this equation essentially. So what we need to do is this. I'm going to say int 3 is going to equal, and I like to use parentheses when I build my math problems, and it's just the way I would do it. If I was teaching a math class or something, this is exactly how I do it as well. So we're going to say int 3 equals int 1 plus int 2. Since this is the addition, then we're just going to add these two together. And you don't have to necessarily have it in parentheses. It's just nice to do that though, because it keeps it nice and uniformed. I just like to do that because I think of it as an algebraic equation. Now I'm going to copy and paste this, and that's just because I'm lazy. You may want to actually type it yourself, and that's just so you because you're going to need the practice. Alright, and you may think that copying and pasting is okay. You know, for you right now, you're new to it, but you really need to actually write it out yourself. I've been doing this for years, so I promise you I don't need the practice, but you're new to this, you need the practice. So don't actually copy and paste it, write it out by hand each time. Alright, so now I've got the value right here, okay? So now these values, or my int3 is going to equal whatever this is. The problem is that int3 does not know or display, or it's not going to be displayed. It's going to hold that value, but it's not visible anywhere. I don't have it defined as somewhere where it can be visible. So this is where the label comes in hand. So we're going to drop down, and we're going to say LBL equals dot text, and this is where we're going to say it equals integer 3, and we're going to say integer 3 to string. Now, because I don't want to lose this though, because I want to be able to see that equals, we need to do something a little special here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this. Now, what's happening here is I've converted this to a string. When I use the double quotations, unlike our comment, this converts anything here to a string, which is simply just words or letters or whatever you want it to be. And then I said plus, add this, and I set that to a string as well. So essentially what this is just telling this is all just one giant string in the text. And this is what I want the text to equal, is this giant string right here. Now, let's go ahead and run this so we can actually see what it actually does, so you can actually see it in play, so it's just not a giant mystery to you. So we have 6 plus 1. Let's solve the problem. 7. Let's do 6 minus 1. 5. Let's do multiplication. 6. And let's do division. 6. So let's kind of crank this up a little. Now, as you can see, it only does whole numbers. And that's because I've told it we're only using integers, which are whole number values. So there's no decimals. We could do decimals, but we're not going to, because we want to keep it simple. So this is our very basic calculator. It only does addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with 2 variables. So unfortunately it's not anything drastic, but believe it or not, you can do quite a bit with this. This concept right here you will use quite a bit if you are building like an accounts payable, accounts receivable. If you are doing like a basic health system for an entertainment piece of software, there's a lot of things that you can use this concept, and you'll reuse these concepts in. Now, the next thing and the final thing, because we are good developers and we comment our code, we need to actually go in and start making our comments. So let's go ahead and do that now. Since we have plenty of time, let's go ahead and start making those comments. And then once we get it commented, we'll understand everything. So we'll say that this is going to be default value. Okay, and then for our select case, we want this to be essentially how to solve the problem, or solve problem. Actually, let's go with build problem, because we're not actually solving the problem necessarily. Well, actually, you know what? We are solving the problem. So let's just say solve problem, because it technically is solved. And right here, we're actually displaying the result. So we're just going to say display. And then here is our selected index. we will say that this is where we actually build the problem. Because this is actually a really critical part where we're actually building the problem, essentially. Or calculating how it's going to be calculated. Whether it's going to be addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. Alright, and right here is just going to be the values. So we'll just say value 1. And we'll just call this one value 2. And voila. We have successfully commented our program. Now, obviously this program is not going to win any Nobel Prizes or anything, but it is a pretty useful little calculator. I mean, it's not going to solve, it's not going to replace probably, your built-in calculator that comes with Microsoft, but nevertheless, it's a pretty good calculator that you'll be able to use. And from this concept, as you've become a better developer, you should be able to make a more advanced calculator that's more equivalent to this. This calculator right here. Eventually you'll be able to make a calculator just like this by yourself, using the concepts that we started out with here. Believe it or not, this calculator is not that complex, and it's not really that much different than this. But that's something else to look into. So let's review real quickly what we've done. Alright, so what we have here is we have our number values, and what we're doing is when you press these little up and down arrows to change that value, we're changing the value here as well. The integer values 1 and value 2 are changing as well. They're going to be equal to these values. And then to determine if we add, subtract, multiply, or divide is based on this combo box's results right here, which we convert those results to a string that we called that string calculate. Once we have that value, we send it to a select case, which we remember select case says, which one did you select? Well, we selected this one by default, or we selected this one, or whatever one we selected. And it says, okay, well, if you selected this one, then this is how your math problem should look. If you selected this one, this is how your math problem should look. If you selected this one, this is how it should look, and so on and so forth. And actually, select case is a little bit more of a complex version of what we call an if statement, which you will use a lot as well. However, select case is a much more organized version of an if statement. And I know we haven't covered if statements yet, but we are actually going to cover that very soon. In fact, I believe we're going to cover if statements in our next tutorial. Don't quote me on that. Nevertheless, though, this really organizes your code. I prefer a select case over an if statement, simply because select case is much easier to read. However, if statements are very nice and have their place as well as far as being useful, and I use them a lot as well. Usually use if statements for like true false. If something's true, or I'm doing a basic comparison. If statements are really good for that. Select case statements are really good when you're giving your users options. Using that combo box, select one of these. Alright, so anyway, this is our basic calculator. Please post your questions about our basic calculator and about how it works, or the functionality behind it. It is really basic, but I promise you that you're going to flip back to this sample a lot. Especially if you're building games, you're going to flip back to this sample a lot for the first, I would say at least 5 or 6 times that you build a game. You're going to flip back to this and see how to build like a damage system or a health bar system using this concept. Or if you're doing office equipment, you're going to probably flip back to this as well. If you're doing accounts payable, accounts receivable, because that's simply just addition and subtraction as well. Alright, so please post your comments, please post any questions or concerns, and thank you.